Alright, time for another DraftPhysics.com video presentation. Debate physics also, but you can't find anybody who will engage in any fair debate. That is, they make a claim, you make a counterclaim, then they counter your counterclaim in some way. So they'll just break the whole process. They'll say things happen and they'll kind of do marginal experiments, nothing obvious, all kinds of subtleties, lots of moving parts to distract you from understanding what's really happening, and lots of fake and phony words to explain it, but nothing to explain actually what happens. So Piro and Professor Michael, Physics Michael, or Michael's Physics, whatever it's called. Anyway, he did these videos, these horrible, stupid experiments that produced free momentum. Obviously I'll counter, you can't do that in an experiment. If you're making free momentum, you're making free energy. And they're applauding each other. It's all just great, but they won't counter what is the argument that, yes, I could, in fact, if it were true that your experiment was actually something to do with reality, that in reality I could collect your extra momentum and make a perpetual motion machine at minimum, and certainly I think could make a free energy machine, and I wouldn't have, I'd be a zillionaire and all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't work, and I can't do it, and it's nonsense. Then they also have in physics, conventional physics, physicists always talk about conservation of momentum. Professor Lewin states, nature can mess with kinetic energy one way or the other, but nature can't finagle momentum. And yet their entire philosophy is completely dependent on momentum being finagled all over the place. You have to destroy it effectively. And even simple things like levers. All right, so we'll go over that real quick just so the argument's clear in the beginning of this video. The thing the Piros and the Michael's Physics evade. They're just Borgish drones, defending a religious theory, and they have they run away as soon as you make a counter argument that they really can't explain. They can't make a coherent, relevant, rational explanation about how it's actually possible that their theory could be the truth, that all devices, levers, springs, gears, and hydraulics all waste a ton of energy, and apparently no one's heard about it. They're not conservational. None of them conserve momentum. Okay, the most basic and fundamental aspect of energy. The one Newton, Galileo, and Descartes, by the way, believed exclusively was responsible for any movement in the universe. So, they're just, it's just pathetic. It's pathetic to have to live on a planet with such weasels and deceptive, lying pieces of scum. But apparently that's the state of things. So all I can do is do my job in this atmosphere, which is to make the reasoned arguments and point out how their theories don't work. So these are the two experiments that Physics Michael did. He did the classic one mass into a two mass. You could do it with a Newton's cradle. You can do it lots of different ways. And it doesn't work, by the way, if you don't have a spring. So as far as we know, no one's ever done it without springs. So if you don't put a spring between these things, somehow they can be hard elastic and it won't work. It has to be spring elastic and then it works. So we haven't seen anybody do it with hard elastic things. So that's another technicality where you're just saying, what the hell is that about? I mean, what are you talking about? That could be a lot bigger, but anyway. Point is, you have 100 momentums, that is mass and velocity, and the idea that momentum, basically this is a Julius Sumner kind of drawing, but the idea is you can convert a big M, okay, into, and with a little velocity, into a big velocity with a little m, but you have to conserve the total amount, and that's the key to the function of the universe. So that's a Julius Sumner kind of statement that they're disagreeing with pretty overtly, but don't have the courage to say so. Anyway, so you put 100 in, and the magical experiment produces 133 out. Okay, going this way. Who cares what's going that way? It's not really part of the... it doesn't matter. I'm saying it's nothing but useful. But the point is that's their argument, that they can make 100 momentums go into an experiment and they can produce out 133 MVs. They've increased one of these disproportionately. Okay, so it's getting the total MV is growing. So I just repeat that experiment as I've pointed out. Repeat it. Okay. I could end up with 4 times the energy. I could use a lever, or I could use 2 gears, or I could use hydraulic cylinders. Okay, so I can use all kinds of different devices, any one of those, and they say none of those will work because none of those conserve momentum. But the idea would be is you end up with 400 momentums here. Obviously you just put into a lever the energy is conserved, you get the 400 back, and you just get it back at a different velocity. So you just change the big M and the little v into a big V and a little m. Just redo the whole thing all over again, put another lever on this side, and you're in the business. You'll get 400 with each trip, so you'll have 800 here, and then you'll have 1600, and then you just keep making more and more free energy. You just siphon a little bit of it off, and you have a free energy machine. Now they haven't accepted the simple chance. Well, why won't this work? And they can't say why it won't work, because if they do, they have to admit that levers are incredibly inefficient. Not a little bit inefficient, but really inefficient in producing anything. And they'll also have to explain how, well, it works one way, but it doesn't work the other way. That is, they'll all say, I'm pretty damn sure, that if I put a 5 mass going 10 here, okay, so it's going 10 velocity, a 5 mass going at 10 velocity, and I put that into this end of the lever, I'm pretty sure they'll say that the 10 mass, I could just sit a 10 mass right there, one distance, that they'll say that 10 mass is going to leave conserving the momentum. So somehow it conserves momentum this way, but somehow going this way it won't. Okay, and this way it'll be destroyed. And I'll only get, if I put the 10 in, the 10 mass going 5, I'm only going to get a 5 going 7 here. I'm not going to conserve the MV. Because obviously if it works the other way, then there is free energy. And they can't admit there's free energy, obviously, because they know it can't be. Because there's so many people trying to get free energy that they would have stumbled on it. If it was this easy, you could just use a lever to get free energy. Everybody would be doing it. I mean, people are dumb, but they're not too stupid to figure that out. But yeah, so what do they think happens when the 5-ton train goes 10 miles? The 5 mass going 10 velocity hits the lever out here, okay, at 2 distances, and I put a 10 mass here. What do they think actually happens? It comes out with only 4 or 3 velocity. I'm just asking the question. But obviously you could do this with gears. I mean, I've pointed out I could stick 2 gears to each other with a 2-to-1 relationship, and you could sort of understand that, if I did the experiment, okay, where I put a little 5 mass out here, and then I hit the gear, okay, with a 10 mass on this gear, okay, going 5, that this one would go, and the gear, this one would swing, and this would conserve the momentum. Because there's nowhere really to lose it. There's no mechanism in here that could figure out that, I can't push the half mass twice the speed. There's no rule inside that says that. It's absolute nonsense. What you're really doing is converting the deceleration of one object and putting it exactly to the acceleration of the other object. So you're fixing the broken Newton's cradle, as I've pointed out. The Newton's cradle can't do this 2-to-1 thing and get all the energy in the 2 mass. But the lever or the gear, these things can. And the fact is, is that, the conservation of momentum is a real thing, and it is elemental to the conservation of energy. And the mv squared never fit, it never worked, The arguments made 300 years ago, I would say, weren't as good as the ones I'm making here, but they were exactly the same in the sense they depended on the fact that we've been using levers for 1,000 years and now you're saying they don't work. That doesn't make any sense. And that's why the argument was defeated, is because people recognized that all these objects that they knew to be conservational, that is, they conserve most of the momentum, the mv squared is basically claiming they don't work anymore. And in this example, like I said, the 33 going the other way can only help because it just resets the device each time. So, just account for that. So it's, they're claiming that somehow this isn't an argument good enough for them to have to respond to it, or they just don't have to because somehow it's so easily debunked by them or something that they don't have to explain how levers actually work. They don't have to tell us exactly how fast does the 10 mass leave. When I put the 5 mass going 10 in this side, 2 notches away, how fast does this leave? Because if they say it conserves momentum this way, how can they say it doesn't conserve momentum that way? I mean, that's on its face kind of ridiculous. You can conserve the momentum this way, but you can't conserve the momentum. So when you're going from heavier to lighter, you conserve. When you're going from lighter to heavier, you don't conserve. Or vice versa. I mean, obviously a nonsense. All right, that's probably the other experiment he did, just to point out. So that's the one experiment. I guess I will pause and erase, since I can. Okay, the other experiment the weasel did, I'm going to call him a weasel because he's weaseling. I mean, this isn't that much of a challenge. It's a clear statement. He's basically lying in the title, talking about conservation of energy and saying he did an experiment that proves something. What he proved is that springs don't conserve momentum, and he's lying, frankly, to say he did anything otherwise. So he did the same experiment, same exact spring compression. All right, and so to contrive conservation of kinetic energy, which again, Professor Lewin would say you don't even have to do because he's already conceding that, yeah, kinetic energy is a little weird. But to contrive, okay, to force it to be true, he does these 2 experiments and he forces the total amount of energy in the spring to be conserved by mv squared, right? Sorry, I forgot the silly little. Then let's understand this is how the formula started. Okay, 300 years ago, that's all it was, just squaring the velocity. All right, and so we did a simple experiment. You put 1s and 1s on here, and nobody would doubt, in a sense, that this experiment's been done so many times that you get the same velocity this way that you get this way. And if you put a double mass here, you'll get 1/2 the velocity going this way. So there is this sense that momentum is certainly conserved in these environments, substantial evidence that it is perfectly conserved. And again, they're saying they can conserve both even though this square exists. Where obviously if I was doing big M to little v and small m, big V conversions, this square is going to create all kinds of mayhem, because if you understand you're squaring a gigantic number, there's no way these 2 things could ever equal each other when the masses are different. So on your face, okay, that the fact that you are conserving the momentum is very dangerous in terms of this experiment. So anyway, he gets this result where, so he puts a 2 mass and a 2 mass, okay, and he gets more than, okay, twice the momentum. So let's just say the total momentum, that is this one versus this one. Okay, let's just say this was 1,000 and this was 1,000 momentums. This was only 500. Okay, so when you put light objects on, the total momentum, the total action in the universe is only 1,000, and when he puts 2 masses on, he gets 2,000. It was actually worse than that. It was more like 3. So no proportionality whatsoever. Okay, no conservation of momentum. Certainly, somehow the same spring has 1,000 momentums here, and it has 2,000 here, and presumably if you do 3, it'll have 3,000. I'm increasing the amount of momentum the spring possesses. by just changing what weights I'm pushing, which doesn't happen. And again, he's saying he's experimentally proven it. He's certain he has experimentally proven it. All right. I mean, that's the danger of this. They do a rickety experiment, imprecise, a little bit sloppy, and they just a little bit lazy, and they say, there, I've proven a physical concept beyond anybody's doubt. Nobody can be credible and doubt that his experiment did this thing, even though the thing is nonsensical, that somehow the spring can't push things. When of course that's exactly what it does, and it pushes them with pressure and weight, and all it matters is it's always going to push. It pushes the same regardless of the mass you put in front of it. It's going to put the force into it as long as the mass isn't too heavy to push, and that's the simple rule. So anyway, just terrible. I guess I should pause and then have a sip of coffee. Alright, so this is what the lying weasel, okay, I guess we have to call him something now, right, because he has evaded, right? I've offered to pay him to directly respond to the arguments I'm actually making. He won't do it. He won't even watch the complete videos. He doesn't really feel he has any obligation to engage with the criticism. Obviously, the criticism was quite polite until he started doing this crap in the comment section where he was doing his let's just dismiss the criticisms with casual statements rather than actually dealing with the arguments that the critic has made, and again has made for over 2 years, offering payments of up to $4,000 to people like Veritasium and others to just engage in the argument, to sit there and draw a lever and explain how it doesn't conserve momentum. But they won't do it. All right. Expanding on the previous session, we test the concept of conservation of energy. So again, conservation of energy can be what? Conservation of mv squared or conservation of mv. It's clearly they're two not compatible ideas. You can't conserve both. It's irrational in any circumstance where I change that m. If I change that m, there's no hope that your experiment is going to conserve both momentum and kinetic energy. For systems involving kinetic energy, gravitational energy, and spring energy. So all these things have energy, but there's no such thing as momentum. I mean, again, it's just, they don't give the word any proper respect. We also test properties of elastic conditions and show that both the total momentum, so let's understand the total momentum is clearly not conserved, and total kinetic energy are conserved. So it's complete nonsense to say his experiment did anything but demonstrate decisively that momentum is not conserved, because that's the only way you conserve the kinetic energy. You understand, you can't possibly do these two things. Okay, you must destroy one to preserve the other. There's no compatibility. Again, this is just such a fake, phony lie that these assholes sit there and preach to the little kids and molest their little brains with this idea that somehow you can conserve both of these quantities when it's obvious that you can't anytime you change the mass. All right, so here's the part where it's the low mass launch, okay, and it clearly its own numbers tell you the story. So he's telling you the velocity of the light carts is 53 meters per second. The velocity of the carts that are almost 3 times heavier, right? It's more than 2.5 anyway. 2.5 times heavier. All right, those carts are going 33. Now, if you're conserving the momentum, they would have to go something less than half of the 53. They couldn't go 33, okay? It's a lot more than 26, right? 33 is a lot more than 26. So it's obviously a lot of extra momentum you've created, especially with the squared term. So you're really doomed, okay, with those numbers. Having any hope of saying you conserve the momentum. Obviously, the momentum was not conserved. You have way too much velocity. you have way too much momentum. You're creating free momentum one way and destroying momentum if you do it the other way. Just a fact. Okay. So this is junk science. This is a crappy experiment. It doesn't make any, it's not coherent to what conventional physics even teaches. Conventional physics does not teach that levers do not conserve momentum. It does not teach that springs do not conserve momentum. It does not teach that gears do not conserve momentum. It does not teach that hydraulic systems do not conserve momentum. None of those things are said by conventional physics. So why are they applauding an idea that is completely counter to everything their physics as a statement states? Every Professor Lewin assertion. The assertion by Professor Lewin that nature cannot finagle momentum. Well, he's finagling it all over the place in these experiments. All right, so the comments are, John Walker says, beautiful, Michael. Nice to see the magnetic potential. So he had magnets on the carts, not a big deal. Obviously more efficient, I would argue, than a spring. So yeah, a good thing to use is magnetic repulsion as a spring. So fine. But again, are they going to explain why these experiments don't work if you don't use a spring? How is the spring making the extra 33% of the momentum happening? You're getting more momentum out. The spring seems to be the only way it ever happens in experiments. Well, how is the spring creating extra momentum? Especially when springs don't conserve momentum. They're basically saying whatever I put into a spring, I don't get what it put in back in momentum. So how can I get 33 extra? If they're so bad at converting momentum, how can I get 33% extra? So then Piro says, great demonstration, thanks. So this is their physics. They're convinced, they're satisfied, okay, that even though it makes no sense, I mean, in the sense there's no consistency with their other theories. So as soon as he does a video showing something completely different, Piro will say, great demonstration, thanks. Even though the two results will be in complete conflict with each other. I mean, that's how irrational all this is. Oh, I think I'll do this bottom one first from Piro. Let's see, I don't think there's anything in here. So another guy says, good experiment. Great case study in the importance of units. I don't know exactly how that has anything to do with it. In today's DraftScience video, blah, 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 blah. Right at the end, they are talking about an experiment where one mass with 100 velocity hits two mass that is at rest. That's exactly the experiment in this video, by the way. If the collision is elastic, right, but it can't be elastic. It has to be called super elastic, right? We have to use these special terms. Rubbery elastic is super elastic, and hard elastic is elastic. So you have to learn their jargon. Okay, conservation of momentum and energy tells us that the two mass will gain 133 momentum. Right, that doesn't make any sense, right? That's not conservation of momentum. Going from 100 to 133 is not conservation of momentum. So that's a little silly on the face, right? They say there's this magical unmomentum that went the other way. So I have a zip gun and I fire two bullets. Their theory is this bullet undid this bullet and the explosion was zero. No energy. So even though I made two speeding bullets, I didn't use any energy to do it. See, that's where it gets so silly and inconsistent and retarded. This idea that I can minus energy. That there's some kind of, I can cause something to move and undo movement in the other way, the other direction. It's just too silly. On its face, it's kind of silly. But they won't counter-argue my statement that that's silly. All right, anyway. While the one mass will rebound with 33, a commenter was trying to explain that the two mass only gets 66 velocity. Well, that's absolutely irrelevant because the mass is double. It's twice the mass. I mean, damn. It makes a difference, okay? Who's punching you, okay? A 200-pounder versus a 100-pounder. All this stuff makes a difference. So it's just absolutely silly for you to think it doesn't matter that you doubled the mass. Well, Gary gets increasingly irate at the and end up hitting his whiteboard. So this is all really relevant, right? Yeah, I'm hitting it out of frustration because you pussies, you cowards, won't deal with this argument. Okay, and ban the commenter while shouting. The small mass will go 33 this way. The big mass will go 133 forward. There's no doubt about the 133 forward. Yes, I mean, there's no doubt that there's now 133 momentums in the universe. You started with just one piece of stuff flying in the universe going 100. Okay, it has a 100 momentum. Now you have a universe that has one piece going 133, say, that way, and another piece going 133 that way. So now you have 166 in the universe of stuff moving. And you're saying that makes sense. And I'm saying, damn, you people are really this stupid? You think that is a possibility of how the universe works? There's a bunch of quiet stuff in the universe. I introduce into the universe 100 momentums. The universe makes 166. And then the next second, the universe makes 299. And then it makes 300, because it just goes on and on. Every single time a little thing hits a big thing, I'm making all kinds of free momentum. It doesn't work in any part of real physics. No real physics does this. If you took the time to say 130 units of momentum or 33 units of velocity, it's not 133 units of velocity. The misunderstanding could have been avoided. So I did say 133 units of momentum. I am saying it's free momentum experiment. How many times have I said exactly that? They're a free momentum experiment. I call it the free momentum experiment. In general, taking care to always mention the units helps clarify the thinking. What does the units have to do with it? It's mass and velocity that we're measuring. You're squaring the velocity. I'm not. There's no ambiguity. Okay, it goes 133 is quite ambiguous. It's not ambiguous. I'm clearly talking about its momentum. It's not going 133 kinetic energy because that's twice as much anyway. Your silly joule number is always twice as much as the momentum number. Oh, God, these people are such liars. All right, this is comic but disheartening at the same time. So these are the cowards who have never drawn a lever, never explained how all these devices do not conserve momentum, and yet physics talks about them as if they do. Springs don't conserve momentum. Why are we putting springs between objects to facilitate the transfer of energy when they're so inefficient? When they can't possibly transfer the momentum from a light thing to a heavy thing, or a heavy thing to a light thing. They can never get the energy from the heavy thing, the momentum, into the light thing. They can't conserve the momentum, and you're sitting there saying, well, let's use that in the energy transfer experiment. Again, this goes back to things that are so obvious. There's no professional bowler using a lighter ball. Why the hell wouldn't they use the lighter bowling ball if there's so much extra energy to be gained? Wrecking balls, why are they big? Why aren't we not knocking down buildings with bullets? If little things going fast has so much more energy. Again, they'll never respond to any of these critiques. They'll just evade them and dismiss me as being somehow the broken party here, the person not using logic, or the person when clearly that's a lie. I'm pleading with you to provide your counter-argument in some sort of coherent manner. And all they do is this evasion and evasion and evasion to overt, obvious facts. Why does NASA kind of talk about the fact that, well, we only use Newtonian physics? Why are they saying that? Yeah, that's right, because when they calculate thrust, they're not squaring it with velocity. They know shooting the big thing out of the gun is the same as shooting the little thing out of the gun. That they're not going to gain anything by exclusively shooting little things. All right, the less info supplied, usually the better. So this is some nut, Carol. Nobody is trying to define the KE for, say, m equals L divided by c squared. Why would any of this come up? Why would anything c squared come up in this conversation about two experiments where your carts are moving, 10 miles an hour? Usually what is asked is, what does m mean without math? So this is just, I don't even know why. Is there any point in reading this? It's so disconnected from the simple physical event that happens all the time on planet Earth, where objects bang into objects moving less than 20 miles an hour. But then science loophole again, because it seems nothing is explainable without math. Then you discover, like Stephen Carruthers, the loop-de-doo nutter who thinks Venus crashed into the Earth, has and it flew by a few times while human beings, so they could draw it on the cave wall. So Venus has done a couple of flybys. This is the nutty crap. They think the craters on the moon were created by lightning bolts. Has, while verifying math of, say, Einstein's, that Roger Addington was being nice when he said moving the goalpost. Well, it certainly is moving the goalpost when you complain about Einstein's two-body versus one-body math. It's really stupid if you don't already know that gravity is created by each material object in the universe. The stuff falling is also gravitational, but usually it's the case that it's much smaller than the thing it's falling into. It's more like moving a virtual OD. Well, whatever. This is just a waste of time. I know some of those words. Whatever. Oh, these people are just so pathetic. Let's see. So he said good experiment, and let's see what the PhysicistMichael said, or Michael Physics, whatever. Michael's Physics. Thanks. If there are any constructive criticism. So again, he's saying none of my criticisms were constructive. So even though I start off polite and just tried to make the counter arguments, he's saying none of that was constructive. None of the videos were constructive. None of the counter arguments were constructive. He's just dismissing them all and evading them all. I can use to improve future videos. Let me know. Well, you could improve it by pointing out how the textbook says you should have to conserve momentum and you didn't. That somehow you're making springs produce variable amounts of movement in the universe, and the spring can adapt. It can push light things fast. It can push heavy things slow. You can compress a spring fast. You can compress a spring slow. It doesn't really care. That's the advantage of a spring. All right, so I'll read this stupid Piro comment. I want to say I think these videos are great. Okay, so they're selling a bizarre idea. Okay, first off, free momentum. And, do you really think that could possibly be true? And I also agree that Gary's confusion, arguments, do drive into just how interesting and confusing classical physics is. So again, Newton didn't get a bunch of wrong answers. He wasn't at all confused. I'd say Descartes was right on when he started talking about the fact that, it's all the same energy. God poked the universe, so to speak, and it's doing it all on its own. You just follow the energy. You just follow the movement. Big things moving is a lot of little things moving, basically. And little things are just a little amount. You can have a little bit of mass going fast. You can have a lot of mass going slow. You can understand that it's all the same amount of mv, and you're just conserving quantities of motion, as he understood the universe. And that works perfectly. So there's nothing confusing about the classical model. It works perfectly. It doesn't have any flaws. So again, they fixed something that wasn't broken. There was nothing broken in Newton's mechanics. There's no reason to fix Newton's mechanics. And they did it anyway because they wanted the woo. Again, this was invented by a guy who basically said Newton and Descartes were two atheists. Their physics was too atheist, and he hated it because he thought it was going to steer mankind from loving God. It's something people should understand more. Yeah, they should understand the history and what they're waving a flag for. They're waving a flag for the Inquisition, frankly. You've gone backwards. We're back in the Dark Ages. And you're just believing in demons and hobgoblins. Okay, especially the your entanglement, especially the reductionism. Oh, what a terrible, harsh thing! The reductionism of thinking and imagining the smaller universe is simpler than the big universe. What an insane idea! That from simple mechanical functions you could end up evolving into a human being. Oh, that's just too silly. Take a pause. All right, had a little bit of a laugh. Okay, reductionism of everything to distance, time. So again, distance is the argument where, distance can be an illusion, especially in constant force circumstances, that you're accruing a faster and faster velocity as you keep gaining more and more increments of force, little bursts of force. You're gaining bursts of force. As you free fall, you're gaining bursts of force. You're gaining the bursts by time, and they're going to create increasing amounts of distance you'll travel because they're increasing your base velocity. Your base velocity keeps increasing. But if you want to know how much energy it is, you have to measure the time. Gravity is a time-dependent force. Again, do I really have to draw it again? It's 9.8 meters per 1 second. That's what you get. You get an increase in your velocity of 9.8 meters every time a clock ticks a second. It's 1 second, not a half second, not a millisecond, not 14 seconds, 1 second. So if you fall 2 seconds, you only get 2 units of acceleration, 2 bursts of acceleration. You're only traveling 19.6 miles per hour. You're not traveling, even though you went 4 times the distance, you're not traveling 4 times the speed. Because you didn't get 4 pieces of energy. All right, the strength of physics is also its weakness. So a bizarre statement. I mean, this really isn't that complicated. Mass and velocity. There's nothing else, okay? It is an MV universe. That is really easy to see. Frankly, if you open your eyes and look at it, it's really easy to see how, yeah, that's how it works. Big M's, little V's, big V's, little M's, it all works out just fine. All right, with things that so far can't be reduced to those metrics. So exactly how? So like emotions so far. So he's saying that emotions aren't some mechanical physics process. Electricity, sparky, that somehow your knee-jerk reactions, just because there's so many in your brain, right? It's knee-jerk, hitting a knee-jerk, hitting a knee-jerk, hitting a knee-jerk. The cascades are humongous in terms of how numerous they are to create our behavior and what we sense. That somehow we have to break the simple universe because we can't possibly explain the 100 billion neurons creating this phenomenon. It's clearly not even close to enough neurons, right? 100 billion? I mean, it's laughable. He's basically saying computers are magic. I just want to help you understand, whatever this is, I just want to help you understand. What is he saying that to PhysicistMichael for? What does that mean? What does he need to understand? Understanding the errors, understanding the errors Gary is making, right? The error of what? So here's the definition of the error. In the name of common sense. So isn't this the funniest fucking term, right? I am apparently, at this moment, one of the only people on planet Earth arguing against the kinetic mv squared, okay? I can't find a single ally, okay, in this task of defeating this horrid monster. Okay, and certainly no one who isn't already a listener to my videos and saying, I think Gary's right. That's sort of the best they do is, I think Gary's right. They can't really know Gary's right because they're not qualified to know, right? So far we haven't convinced a single physicist or anybody of some merit on planet Earth to concede that this is something that should be called common sense. So at the current moment, common sense is free momentum theories. And common sense is levers don't conserve momentum, gears don't conserve momentum, hydraulics don't conserve momentum, springs don't conserve momentum. So that's their common sense. So let's just understand, common sense means everybody gets it. Clearly, I'm not on the everybody gets it side. Okay, is in fact worthwhile because they actually are things people could understand better. I'll argue that you'll never understand why you have a squared velocity. Okay, you'll never understand the linear thing, a direction, a velocity, and you'll never understand how it has a volume. Okay, that you can turn it into a volume of velocity. That's frickin' silly. Even people that already believe them, whatever this is, even people that already understand them, I don't even know what this means, but he's saying, I'm making some simpleton error, okay, because I'm not getting how the magical v squared thing is just so fixy. It just fixes all the problems. I mean, it makes all the Descartesian and Galilean and Newton errors go away. Oh, wait a minute. They didn't have any errors to have to go away. Okay. I mean, the reason why they're famous is because they got right answers, right? This is the irony. They're not famous because they got wrong answers. Sometimes these things I hadn't thought too much about. Sometimes things I hadn't thought too much about. It's all such a personal thing for him. Like the interesting symmetry of work being FD. So there's absolutely no symmetry to it in the sense of unless you want to believe in free energy, because the distance obviously doesn't relate to the force. The force is more connected directly to the amount of time you apply it, especially in the case of gravity. It's 9.8 meters per second. You can't get more connected to time than to be per second. I mean, it's clearly telling you it's in units of time. You only get one clump of 9.8 per a second free falling in the force. You can't get any more than that. You can't get any less than that. That's what you're going to get. I mean, obviously you can get less if you apply a friction source, a drain somehow, if you drain the energy out. So it's just so silly. And momentum being Ft. So again, obviously this duality of concepts. Again, work isn't anything other than energy, and it's just the portion we care about. So there's lots of work a train will do when the wheels are spinning and all this stuff is happening. The only part we count as work is the part that makes the train move. Okay, all the heat and all the other stuff, we don't count that. So we imply that there's some other thing called a work. There's nothing other than energy. Okay, and work is just a portion of the energy, the portion we like, the portion we want. We call work. One thing I agree with Gary on this is ought to be more of these type of experiments on YouTube. There ought to be more anywhere in the, whether they're in research papers, whether anywhere. They should be somewhere. Somebody should have done the experiments. Okay, though he's silly to expect everything to be a video on YouTube. Yeah, just like you're silly to expect somebody to be able to take a clear picture of a UFO. I mean, it's not like everybody on Earth has a cell phone, right? With a, at least, 1080p resolution. No, we can only get the 640 by 480 version of the UFO. I mean, it's so illogical. That I should expect in 300 years that you do the elemental experiment and prove it actually takes 4 times the fuel to go twice as fast. Something so elemental, so fundamental, and you are barely, upset that they haven't shown that yet. Oh, it's so obvious, and yes, we all know it, and yes, it's got to be the truth, and yes. Well, yes, it's a little curious that nobody's videotaped that, pouring all that fuel in, glug, 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 just to go twice as fast. Thanks and again, this is just based on the gravity argument. Because something falls 4 times the distance to go twice as fast in gravity, they have now declared that it always takes 4 times the fuel, because they think the distance was the fuel in gravity. They still can't recognize 9.8 meters per second. It's about the time. It's only 2 seconds. 4 times the distance, 2 times the time. The time is where you got the fuel from. The time is the fuel. The distance isn't the fuel. I mean, it's so stupid. They're being so ignorant. I mean, it's just amazing to me that I have to repeat these arguments over and over, and these fucking morons won't concede that gravity is a time-dependent force. It's entirely dependent on how long you're falling. Free falling in the gravity will decide how fast you're going, and how, you know, it's fundamental, and it's telling you how much energy you got in units of time. I mean, you have to make a choice, right? It's 4 times the distance, it's only twice the time. The simple argument is, well, doesn't 9.8 meters per second relate directly to time? And 9.8 meters, yes, there's 9.8 meters in there, but the idea that it's per 1 second, the per part is the important thing, right? I could change the 9.8 to 17 or 140 or any kind of number, right? You know, of how much I'm gaining, but if I'm going to understand how much I gained, the only way I can understand it is it's per a unit of time. It's not a per a unit of distance. It's a distance per a unit of time. Thanks for the videos, and I personally think a good outcome would be a robust conversation about these issues. So what does robust mean? I love you, Piro. Please make another fake video. And then they'll comment and they'll say nothing on other morons' videos. I don't think Piro thinks it's twice the energy. I mean, 4 times the energy in a twice compressed spring. I mean, I think Piro would say, no, that isn't true. There's not 4 times the energy in a twice compressed spring. But does he tell the Ian Gosling guy that? No. So will they ever criticize each other? Or ever debunk each other? Wacky claims? Never. I mean, one of the players in all of this is a free energy nut. He does believe in free energy. That's one of them. Anyway, conversation about these issues with a hands-on aspect like you are taking. So the hands-on aspect is to completely lie about what the video showed, which was absolute destruction of conservation of momentum, abolishment of conservation of momentum, free momentum in one experiment, free momentum in the other one, the springs. Completely unequal momentums at minimum. You go compress a spring and you get different amounts of momentum out of it. That's what he proved. All right, so let's see what he said. Over the past couple years, I've been fascinated looking into topics like epistemology and understanding how people reach conclusions. Too bad you won't look up the history of the kinetic energy theory and just see how bad it is. So Leibniz was a religious nut who was basically half the time talking about how physics is God revealing himself. Okay. And then de Châtelet, the woman who resurrected the dead theory, was tutored by a Leibnizian. She's actually called a Leibnizian, and he sued her for plagiarism because she stole his Leibnizian love talk, his Leibnizian poetry. Essentially, she used the same words that he used in describing the wonderful living force. So that's the other part. It was called the living force. That's the title Leibniz gave it, the living force. I mean, it should be a little bit obnoxious to a physicist. And how best to present evidence and data in a convincing way. So do it amateurish, sloppy. Let's not really examine what the experiment does. So I detailed how his stupid drop the weight and move the car experiment actually works. That the entire source of the energy for the car's movement sideways is completely created by the drop of the weight in gravity. So the weight's collecting the energy you're using. And all of the energy the weight's not using has to go into the cart. It should be that when one is presented with evidence, we rationally weigh that evidence against what we've previously identified. Well, that sounds like something, but I mean, what you have to also measure it against is what you've already previously asserted. If you've already asserted that you have to conserve momentum and then you don't, that's called a contradiction, and that's illogical. Okay, and in a manner of Hume, proportion our confidence to the strength of the evidence. So again, you don't have any experimental evidence in 300 years of it taking 4 times the fuel to go twice as fast. I mean, you can't even show me a half of an experiment or a quarter of an experiment. You can't show me a single bit of experimental evidence demonstrating it. And again, we have the Mythbusters evidence where they went to the trouble to crash a car into a brick wall at 100 miles an hour and then crash the same car, same design, into a brick wall at 50 miles an hour. Clearly, quite almost exactly twice the compression of the car. Okay, not 4 times the compression of the car. And when they did it with clay, they got the same results. So you have some experimental evidence anyway, and clearly I've seen these crash tests before, and there's always this indication that it's about momentum, that they don't really talk about this mv squared stuff having anything to do with it. Alright, unfortunately, this often doesn't happen. No, it never happens. Your whole physics is made out of underdone examination of experiments. That's why you have this whole wacky 2-slit thing. Again, the Young analysis doesn't even produce a double slit pattern. This is how ludicrous their physics is they call it the Young double slit experiment. His experiment doesn't produce a double slit pattern. It's a single slit pattern. And they can't even figure out that, well, that's really deceptive, isn't it? First, to call it the Young double slit, because yes, he has 2 slits, but he's not producing the right pattern with the slits. If you're not producing the right pattern, it's not a double slit pattern. I mean, it's not a double slit experiment. Clearly, you annihilated the slits by making them so small. You took away 2 of the point sources by putting the 2 surfaces so close together that they couldn't possibly create constructive and destructive interference. And they couldn't possibly create the more complex double slit pattern. I mean, this is not even difficult to find. And you people haven't found any of it. You haven't looked for any of it. You haven't examined your physics at all. You've just been doopy believers. Unfortunately, it often doesn't happen, and it takes training. Here we go. To be a real good Borgite, you have to train to ignore the counter arguments, ignore the people saying you're an idiot. Yes, just keep marching on as a good Christian soldier for physics. The living force, we must preserve the living force. Dun, 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 dun. And you wave your little fucking flags. Okay, and effort to identify our cognitive blind spots. Yeah, well, you have them all over the spots. You're covered in spots, fella. I'm absolutely including myself in this description. Yes, well, I'd include you in it too. You overlook a lot. All right, and I'm constantly concerned about what blind spots I have. You don't show any of that concern. I'm giving you a pretty clear indication that I've spent 2 years exclusively pretty much talking about this subject and researching this subject, and there's not a goddamn thing you people believe in that has any substance at all. There's absolutely no good arguments in the past of the history of this stupid thing. There's no good evidence. There's no good science. It's all just show and blow. There's nothing go. I'm going to be making some scientifically critical thinking videos. Well, I wonder what subject he'll take on. I wonder. Maybe critical think about the idea of, oh yeah, LIGO can measure the width of a proton after they banged a light beam into a mirror 1,600 times. Yeah, I believe that. that I hope will release in tandem with these testing physics series, yeah, whatever, where I talk about ideas in developing experiments. Yeah, like just show us a lever and show how it doesn't conserve momentum. That would be a good experiment. Talking and analyzing data, etc. Yeah, well, again, what point is there to have data if your data is obviously not very credible? I mean, you're measuring velocities where you're getting free momentum velocity readings. You don't seem very disturbed by that, and you don't seem challenged to make sure your velocity readings are correct by measuring them in two ways, let's say. Like, videotape the experiment and use the frame rates to see if the velocities are exactly what the instruments are telling you. And then use this series as case studies. Case studies in evasion and propaganda, frankly. Let's contrive experiments. Let's force the results. Let's fake the whole goddamn game. Let's do it so incredibly weakly that all kinds of errors can be introduced. The problem is always finding the time to execute these plans. Very much appreciate the feedback and welcome suggested constructive criticism. Well, you're not going to get any of that from the insipid Piro. Okay, I agree. So Piro can't even make a video. So, he hasn't done anything, whatever. The substance of the time I've been talking about this, all he did was the convoluted math thing where he said per second means second squared. And that's just convoluted mush. And that's all he did. So he hasn't touched the lever argument at all. He hasn't touched the spaceship argument at all. He hasn't touched any of the arguments about how these two theories are not fundamentally compatible. Every single time you change the mass, you will destroy. One of the theories has to die. Okay. I agree and think physics is a great way we can practice facing our blind spots and confusion, since the experiments just keep being confusing until you sort it out. So again, there's the experiment, the fact that the Young double slit analysis doesn't even produce right answers. That is, it doesn't actually predict the pattern you'll see, especially if you use open slits. It doesn't even come close. I mean, that's not a hard fact to ascertain. And when Richard Feynman, a great show physics, draws the interference pattern as just a bunch of silly curved lines, when it's a very specific pattern. The double slit pattern has a very specific profile. The single slit, a very specific profile. Double maxima in the center. Double slit, double maxima plus, blah, 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 blah. No double maxima. Well, yeah, the double maxima in the envelope. So it's basically, you can, these things are very diagrammed, very precise, and physics takes it all very casually, does it very sloppy, says water waves are just like light waves, when it doesn't match in the single slit, and it doesn't match in the multi-slit, and it barely matches at all in the double slit. So again, it's just such garbage for these people to talk about the integrity of physics and preserving its integrity and doing things right, when all they do is sloppy and wrong, to force the results to confirm their babbly boo, fairy godmother physics. It's like a way to practice, and then it's easier in regular life where it's even harder. I don't know what that means. It's easy in practice, but in regular life it's harder. Anyway. All right, so this was a little bit entertaining also, this comment, so we'll read it. Do we still have the comments out? Yeah, they're still there. Okay. Other subject. For a while I thought about getting a track and sensors and doing these kinds of experiments. Not to convince and mend them. It's DraftScience, which I think is impossible. Right, so frankly, I will be convinced if you can show a credible experiment where it takes 4 times the fuel to go twice as fast. That'll be pretty good evidence. There's lots of things you could do, but you're not going to do any of those things. But for the reasons you are doing it. So the reasons he's doing it is to try to gain some sort of viewership as a instructor in the subject of physics. And clearly he's just a propagandist for a bad religion. It's interesting that there is a lot to learn from it for viewers. So again, there's nothing to learn. They're feeding the lead paint to the saps and getting them to believe in bullshit that is so unnecessary, so superfluous, absolute garbage. The wave theories are garbage. The whole wishy-washy ESP particle bullshit, it's all garbage based on bizarre interpretation of sloppy experiments. But the tracks, I mean, look, if mv squared is eventually figured out to be a nonsense, all the crap in particle physics goes away. All the silly particles they invented. There's no more neutrinos. You're not going to hear the word neutrino anymore because they're all byproducts of the fact that they keep creating a bunch of fake energy in their experiments that they have to account for. They don't measure anything, So it's all theoretical. And every time they do an experiment, they end up with fake energy because they don't measure the actual energy of anything. But the tracks for sale are not only expensive but all proprietary. So yeah, they're using all their, you can only plug their sensor into their units, and they try to figure out how to make everything Apple-ish. You can only plug an Apple device into an Apple kind of bullshit. I wish there was an open source option, but I don't find one. Something with Arduino sensors and non-proprietary software. All of this should just be pluggable into your computer, for fuck's sake. None of this is, brain surgery. The sensor is basically just a fast mouse, a fast optical mouse. Frankly. So yeah, it all should be really easy to do, but nobody in physics is, just like everything else, there's nobody who loves physics except for the money. I mean, Professor Lewin loves physics, and he has commercials all over his fucking videos. Probably has a substantial pension he's living on, and he has to grub for the little pennies. Okay, and while the tracks are maybe fairly priced based on their precision construction, and the sensors are, so the carts are fairly priced, but the sensors are out of whack. The carts look pretty chintzy to me, frankly, and with the current plethora of cheap sensors. I've looked a little at getting some to produce an open source alternative, but at this point, that's a post-retirement project for me, smiley face. So, whatever, we'll have to wait a while. Longer than I'm going to wait, frankly. But yeah, so I mean, this idea of doing the experiments myself, I mean, it does occur to me that would be to my advantage to some extent, but I really just, as a practical matter, it's not going to work. Because I really don't have the facilities. But I am saying, I do have a strobe that's maybe 16, a second. I don't know how many seconds. That's the trick. It probably doesn't strobe fast enough. But anyway, the idea of doing some, whatever you call that, photography. But you get very exact if you can use a strobe and you get the time-lapse photography images. Those are pretty good for getting an absolutely correct velocity number. But anyway, that's for the future. Somewhere, maybe, possibly. But again, there's so many people doing so many kinds of engineering videos. You would think there would be somebody with a clean lab that would be willing to design a few kinetic versus momentum experiments, a few of the Mythbuster style video. But that's the glaring, oh dear, part of this, right? If the Mythbusters spent a lot of money producing their show and they couldn't even figure out that what they were arguing was really stupid. I mean, they were actually arguing that, if somebody was standing, in the middle of a 250-mile-an-hour car crashes, 250-mile-an-hour cars, that it would feel to the guy in the middle like a 100-mile-an-hour crash, and of course it would. And they couldn't even do that experiment, that is, measure that experiment correctly, because they measured it based on what the 50-mile-an-hour people are feeling, instead of what the person in the middle would feel. I mean, they couldn't even separate that analysis properly. All right, so let's see what this last remark from, oh, there's another one down there at the bottom. Anyway, I agree, and if you ever find someone or a supplier for these kinds of sensors, let me know. I have been finding ways to use smartphone sensors and apps like physics something, physics toolbox suite, etc. for a lab activities and demos. So that's almost a little frightening, frankly. Google physics. Also, taking high quality slow motion video in a way that's relatively easy to analyze with free software. I don't know why you need software to analyze a video, but anyway, or just having a good scaled background. Not to convince in Mendham, which I think is impossible. In his recent live stream, so at least he's time coding, that's very nice of him, he put it well. If an experiment matches with the kinetic energy theory, it's a faulty experiment. So that's a lie. So again, they always lie. I said if it's creating free momentum, okay, it can't be true. Okay, so if you think the concept of free momentum in the universe is a real concept, I'm saying I am way past certain you're going to be found to be a sack of shit, stupid retard, frankly, because it's an insipid idea, and it would have been noticed already if this phenomenon took place, where energy increases or energy disappears. It's not an accepted by classical physics. It's a conflict with their own physics. It's in conflict with their own physics. Their own physics doesn't have this idea that there's something traveling in the universe that's actually an unmomentum, and that it was the product of an explosion somewhere where it was the opposite reaction that prevented there being extra energy going the other way, because it's the counter energy. And so somehow it's an unbullet. And when the unbullet hits you, it doesn't really blow your brains out because it's an unbullet. I mean, it's just an absolutely silly idea. That is telling. Thanks for the reference. So let's understand. They lie about me, and then he says, thanks for the reference. And the fact is, these are the people that in 300 years, 350 years, whatever, they can't produce a single, solitary, detailed, recorded event of when they put 4 times the fuel to go twice as fast. So even though it's the elemental conclusion of their theory, it does in fact take 4 times the energy, the fuel, to go twice as fast. They're overtly telling the world that is the truth. If you go double your speed, you got to use 4 times the fuel to do it. That's their fundamental big idea that comes out of this wacky theory, and they don't have a single recorded event. Not in 350 years can they show us, like, they had to feed the horse 4 times the hay. They can't show an electric motor doing it. They can't show a gasoline motor doing it. They can't show a single mechanical advice where this rule is obeyed, that it takes 4 times the energy to push something twice as fast, that it takes 4 times the energy, or twice the energy to push something twice as light. So I cut the mass in half, and to get it to go twice as fast, I have to do twice the amount of energy. So if I want to push a 5-pound bowling ball versus a 10-pound bowling ball, I can't push the 5-pound ball twice the speed as the 10-pound ball without adding twice the energy. Silly. On its face, garbage. And they don't have a single frickin' experiment. They'll never show the 8-pound bowling ball actually knocking down more pins, or knocking the pins down in some more decisive manner. Never will they show it. They won't show a single professional bowler using an 8-pound bowling ball, because it's twice the energy. If I can throw it twice as fast, I get twice the energy by their theory. Zero evidence for any of these things. And yet they talk this arrogantly. That isn't good science. To talk this arrogantly about something you haven't produced any real hard evidence for, that's not science. That's fucking religion. And so just own up to what you people are, which is religious kooks. All right, I think that's probably enough, but we'll pause and we'll see if there's anything else to deal with. I mean, I could go back to, frankly, his dissertation. You know, I asked him 2 simple questions, and he provided all of this mush. I mean, all I asked was, do springs conserve momentum? I mean, I can ask the lever one, I can ask all of these, because apparently they don't think any of them conserve momentum. And none of them can by their own theory. It's just the fact that their theory does fall entirely apart if there is any device that conserves momentum with unequal masses. So if I create any device that can possibly get the energy from, the momentum, all the momentum from a lighter mass into a heavier mass, or a heavy mass into a lighter mass, if I do find such a device, it will blow up the kinetic energy theory. The theory's over, because it is now free energy. I will make free energy by their theory. So that device will be a free energy device. So yes, they have to sit there and somehow try to say that none of these devices conserve momentum, even though their physics writes it as a headline. You must conserve momentum. Feynman wrote it on his chalkboard. I mean, people have written it on the chalkboard. You have to conserve the momentum. Yet they don't believe you really do. I mean, they believe both things, which is obviously as stupid as thinking there's a God and then there's Jesus. And, well, yeah, he's God too. Yeah, it's God. God gave birth to himself. You know, that kind of thing. It's okay. It makes sense. Once you know it all makes sense. So if you read the whole Bible 468 million times, it'll all start to make sense. But that's the key. You have to read the Bible over and over and over again. And then you tap your heels 3 times and say there's no place like silly physics. There's no place like silly physics. There's no place like silly physics. And then you become a lunatic moron. You become one of these, whatever, religiousists. Idiots. I mean, they're idiots. Okay, so he says no springs do not collect momentum. So, simple question. So a spring does not collect the momentum of the object that hits it. It does not collect its momentum and then give back the momentum. So it doesn't really collect it, and then you lock it, and then you store the momentum. That event doesn't happen. Even though I think all the experiments demonstrate that's exactly what happens. You compress the spring, the energy, everything stops moving because the tension is in the spring. The momentum is now in this tension in the spring. And if you let the spring shoot back, it'll shoot the object back. But if you don't let it, lock it in that position, you could store the energy, you could store the momentum for 10,000 years. And 10,000 years later, it would be very old, you can just unlock the spring and all of a sudden, boom, there's your energy, still there, your momentum. And you'll get back exactly what you put in. You won't get back 133. Oh. It's so bad. All right, I'll take a break and I'll see if there's anything else. All right, so anybody who has been in this conversation for any amount of time knows for 2 years I've asked people to draw levers. Now, we know Piro can make videos, so he's talking trash in this guy's comment section about me. So that's kind of rude on its face. And yet this coward won't do what I've asked somebody to do for 2 years. It's just diagram a lever. Okay, and explain how this device does not conserve energy. It doesn't work. That is, if I put a 1 mass, okay, at 2 velocity, all right, I won't get a 2 mass at 1 velocity. It won't work. A 5-ton train won't make a 10-ton train going 5 miles an hour, and vice versa won't happen. Clearly can't happen because that would be free energy. So now their theory is that it can't work either way. Okay, it's going to destroy the energy. In the one case, just like the train example, or it's going to make free energy. And so explain how it doesn't work, that this does not conserve momentum. All right. So just explain how you can put any kind of, like, it oscillates perfectly. So let's understand, it will oscillate perfectly. And an oscillator means the energy goes from one side back to the other side, back to the other side, back to the other, just keeps going back and forth. That's an oscillator, bouncing back and forth, being trapped inside of a vessel and having the energy bounce back and forth is the oscillator. So how the oscillator, okay, can possibly have, this will go exactly twice the velocity here that this one moves, okay, for the same amount of time, the same distance. I mean, this one's twice the distance, for this one's 1 unit of distance, okay, clearly twice the energy by their mv squared theory. Clearly momentum works perfectly. Momentum explains why it oscillates perfectly. And I could put a quarter mass way out here and do the same thing. So that's the experiment I did. Oscillates perfectly. So explain how it can possibly oscillate perfectly without losing any energy, momentum, but I can't throw the objects. So just explain what's the difference between it being on the lever and the next minute being off the lever. Like I just put a stop here on the lever. So it's oscillating perfectly, and I just put a stop right here. And now the lever stops, and the ball flies off at exactly its oscillating speed. Well, isn't that going to be exactly its oscillating speed? It's going to be twice the velocity, and this will be 1 unit of velocity if I put a stop here. So I'm just saying these are impossible, in my opinion, thought experiments to debunk. You can't possibly explain how this fulcrum knows that you put a lighter object out here and the lighter object somehow weighs more, more than this weight, that's somehow harder to push or something. No, the lever is doing exactly what you would expect in a Newton's cradle. It's allowing the heavy thing to create a fast velocity. It's allowing the deceleration of this object to match the higher acceleration of this object. The lighter object can accelerate faster. The slow one has to accelerate slow, so it allows those two lines to match. It allows the conversion to take place. One thing is slowing down and the thing speeding up, and it allows those two things to be proportional to each other. This one loses the energy at its slow rate. This one gains the energy at its faster rate. And the two match because the masses are, it's half the mass. There's just no way to diagram how it doesn't conserve momentum. So just explain how it doesn't conserve momentum. And then tell me that your theory is correct. Because again, if that lever conserves momentum, I can make the free energy device out of your extra momentum experiment. No problem. All right. So enough of a video. But they won't do it. So all the critics just continue to show how big a weasels you are by acknowledging that no one will do what I've asked explicitly over and over again, and offered money for them to do it. I will pay, Michael's Physics, to draw a lever and explain how it works. And he won't do it. He won't even give me the fucking price. How much do I have to pay him, to explain how the lever fails to conserve momentum, and how a gear fails, and how the spring fails, and how the hydraulic system fails to conserve momentum? That every single mechanical system essentially fails to conserve momentum, even though they say nature can't finagle momentum. I mean, the contradiction is just so overt. Why are all of you people this dishonest, and you won't admit that? No, they should answer your point. Yes, it's a good point. They should answer it. You can't say that? Fuck. Scummy. You're all very scummy. and such. So that's enough of a video. So again, draftphysics.com, debatephysics.com, and obviously I can't post their counter arguments because they won't make any.